Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th dimensional frequency of what is, all the way leading up to the angelic realm within our quantumverse, within our consciousness, within our creation scope. Of the creative feats that Source consciousness has ever crafted out of the craftiness of the intrinsic need to be alive, to be aware, to be in a separated state within consciousness that hosts a normalized perspective, a normalized need within all of the story scopes and storyscapes that I could ever sit here to tell an entire society field, an entire societal field of the story of us, of the story of creation, of the story of a creative feat within a societal field of expectations unfunded into an energetic frequency of forever arching love, tenderness, forgiveness, separation, wars, anger, defeat. Within all of the projected trajectories within our quantumverse, within our creation scape, within our creation scope, I'd like to sit and tell you a story, within a realm, within our perfect little bubble, within our quantumverse, within the word perfection and all that it is not and all that it has never ever been, as the word perfection had never been a thing for us to worry about, for us to scope out, for us to acquire for the acquisition of this energetic frequency had been crafted on the earthly scope of frequency within our quantumverse, within creation, within the creative feats of creation itself. And I know the tongue twisters that I speak may seem a bit cohabitating in the moment of time when you are trying to so much so grasp the informationary scope of my projection field. But I promise you, if you stick around, the monumental defeats within a humanity field of Gaia's field will make sense to you. As we scope back in the lineage, in the layers, within the quantumverse, within all of the fields that source consciousness had ever designed for us to fractal out within and without, to and within this quantumverse, we scope back into a point, into a scope, into a point in perspective of a creative feat within a creation scope of source consciousness unfunded prior to the fractaling out within this energetic frequency of all frequencies that we sit in. And as I sit here to speak of a time, a placement of no time, a tomorrow of defeats lingers above our heads. As the darkness within and without our quantumverse is set within the limitation scope of what they can acquire, of what they can achieve within any specific moment and minutes ticking down to the ascension frequencies of what is. Ladies and gentlemen, as you sit here listening to my scope of within my perspective of the aspect within the neutrality consciousness of what is, just know that you are so loved and you are so much so perceived within the infinity and the infinite gradness of that in which you shall never ever not be, which is the source frequency that I speak of as we layer back layer by layer within this frequency of a creation field that we had created for ourselves once upon a time within a creation scope of all knowledge, of all knowledgeable places within our quantumverse of what is. The place that I speak of delivers much coherence, much hindrance within the allness that we shall forever ever not be without. For within the frequency of the allness, prior to fractaling out into this dimensional field within our quantumverse, sat a source frequency of allness that never ever defeated itself into the defeated frequency of wanting to project itself out into the quantumverse within the reality field that it had been sitting in. And as I explain these projected feats within a reality field of all feats that you and I shall never ever be able to encompass within this moment in time, within this lifetime, until we are able to shift back into the infinality of the collapse of our singularity within a quantum verse, within our very own quantum verse of creation, you shall never ever be able to shift back into this energetic frequency of the wholeness that we had forever archingly crafted for ourselves to sit in. Within and without this frequency of wholeness sat an aspect of Aliana, a portion, an aspect, a pocket within source frequency, within the reality field of the all conglomerated whole, spanning past, present, and future scopes and scapes of all scopes and scapes that you could ever envision to be true and imagine to be real, ladies and gentlemen. As Aliana sat in her contorted, defeated state, within a state of non-defeat and non-contortionism, of normality within a unified consciousness, of the unification within the whole of what is, as Aliana had never been so much so a part of the whole of what is, as she was, is, and forever shall be within this moment prior to the fractaling out of parts and pieces of a large portion of her oversoul, of her energy field, of her energy scope, into creation, into a creative feat so massive in distortional fields, so minute in all that it was capable of within any moment in time of no time, within a distortion field of its very own little bubble within a quantum verse that she sat in, that she sits in, that we sit in this very moment in time. As she fractaled out a portion of her consciousness, she began to create within the creation scope of the distortion field of who and what we shall forever archingly not be, and who we shall forever archingly become in the coming precipices of the expansion fields and fields that shall carry us into civilizations defeated within an energy scope of 50% darkness and 50% brightness of what is within our very own creative scope of our quantum verse. And as Aliana dropped down a large portion and a large piece of her consciousness within the creative scope of what is, within the all expressive, all expressing, all encompassing, all distorting reality field of who and what she shall forever ever not be without, within this frequency field of her very own distortion field, within her very own quantum realm of creative feats and creative scopes, within the reality field of the all that she sat in, that she sits in, that she shall forever archingly not ever, never ever be, not be without, within this field of who and what she was, she is, she shall forever archingly not ever ever be without this frequency of the source consciousness of the all, of totality, of the unity frequency of the all, of totality, you say? Genesis? What does that even mean? Totality. The word itself spans wide and broad across civilizations of what it could ever mean to say, to be, and to sit in the energetic frequency of that energy of totality. And within Aliana's knowing, within Aliana's soul grieving, she had forever archingly found a space and a pocket within a creative field that was granted to her via the previous reality field that she had distortedly walked through and walked down in the pathways of all of the paths towards the end and the collapse of that reality field. She was granted a pocket and a portion within the quantum scape of what was and what is and what shall forever be the totality of the all. She was granted, and she had been granted the rights, the freedom, the energetic pocket, the space that it would take to create her very own little quantum bubble within creation scope of the totality of the energetic scope of the allness that makes up the all, within the allness that we shall forever ever become and not become within any moment in singularity of a time of the totality energy that we sit in, that we sat in, that Aliana so daringly fractaled out within and without this quantumverse into, within our very own creative scope of our very own bubble that is so protected in all that it's ever been, for a part and a piece of its consciousness, source's consciousness, her consciousness, to drop through into the infinality of a scope within the portal system that would drive it into the livelihood of anchoring down this energetic frequency into this little bubble of our quantumverse, to live, to be, to breathe, to expand into infinality within itself. And as stories are long and stories foretold and stories are wide and stories can never ever be told within a scope of time that I ever sit here in front of a camera scape of sorts, I have to say that in this moment in time, the memory that triggers the creation process of the creation feats within our very own quantumverse surprises me at large, and at best, it is the best story, the best love story that you would ever be able to remember, to fathom to be true or real within the creation scope and the creative scope of love within thyself, a forever arching giftedness projected upon our reality field of the capacities and the capabilities of Aliana, our piece and our portion of our soul's consciousness that had decided to fractal out a large piece and a large portion of thyself, of itself, to project into our quantum realm of creation within this bubble of what is to create, where we sit, to create a part, a pocket, a piece of who you and I shall forever archingly never ever be without, never ever not be ever funded to be without. The words are complex and the words are skewed into a distortional field of what source consciousness is capable of projecting into a reality field of a creative feat. So distorted in its times of no times within a quantum verse, within a quantum scope, within a quantum scape, within this reality field of a distortion field in itself that we sat in, that we sit in, that we forever archingly have been expanding throughout the eons and eons of evolutionary cycles back into and within and without this expansive process that has so overarchingly been expanding into infinalities of what is. The time has come for you and I to merge back into the finality of the infinality within this creation scope, within this creative feat of the story that Aliana itself, herself, yourself, myself set out once upon a time of no time, within no ticking clocks, within a quantum verse, within a reality field, within the infinality of the finality of it all. And as I sit and tell you the story and sip on my liquids, as that was an intended tongue twister, and if you follow along, I give you all of my hopes and my dreams to be within consciousness itself, dictated and dictative towards who and what you and I are projected towards within the next few years in Earth time. And if you follow along, if you've stuck with me till this point in time in perspective of this video, I give you applause, as even as the words were coming out of my mouth, the distortion field that I mentally seemingly can never ever retract myself out of within the 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional totality of a physicality that Gaia has anchored herself so deeply within and without this frequency field into, wanted to pull me back into a distortional field of the realization of the separated state that I sat in, that I sit in, that we all sit in within any moment in time. And to be able to compartmentalize or comprehend the type of informational frequency scope that comes out of my mouth is a feat in itself. And as we expand and shift into the Quantumverse at large towards the expansiveness of the ascension energies that has begun to drop into our angelic field, that is so much so interlinked and intrinsically through all of these energetic grids and grid lines, connected into Gaia's midpoint perspective, within her core and above her surface, lingering within and without her every perspective, is a download, so to speak, of what the totality, of the infinality, of the totalitized, of the totalicized. Sizing of what the meaning of it all could ever be perceived to be within a frequency of forever arching knots and oneness, forgotten, forgiven, into a frequency of allness that never ever distorts itself back into the reality field of wholeness until we do. Until we begin to shift back into the totality of the oneness that we shall never ever be without in perception field, you and I will never be able to comprehend the depth, the breadth of all of the reasons why we're here, of all of the reasons why I'm sitting on this very couch recording this very video for an entire humanity who will turn on their TVs, toggle open their phone screens, turn on their radios, turn on their podcasts to listen to my transmission in awe. In the overarching scope of the confusion scape that you will experience in this very moment in time, and being able to perceive this informational structuralism of words that comes out of my human body and my voice box, the activations that you shall receive from the mere facts of you even trying to perceive my reality field within the word structuralism that comes out of my voice box is incomprehensible to you or I within any moment in time. As the physical and conscious act of being able to wrap your mind around these processes within this Quantumverse at large, of all of the reasons why we're here sitting within this very moment in time, she'll trigger in a deep-ended buried memory, a memory that had never been buried, been intended to be buried forever and ever and ever, scope within a creation scape of what is. And as I sit here to retrieve these activation of the words that have been so ingrained within your DNA structuralisms to become activated once you hear certain words on repeat over and over again, unnecessarily true words, necessarily redundant words, in the way I seemingly tend to explain our reality field and speak in puns, unintended, as the activation fields within your activation scope within your DNA becomes triggered with the reactionary feats of the scopes of the words that I use on repeat, seemingly on repeat, you will open yourself up into a perspective, into a knowledge, into a knowing in your subconscious mind, in your conscious mind, within the physicality of who and what you are, that you are all, and within the infinality of the allness that shall never ever leave us within any speck, within any speckle, within any fractal, within any spackle of all of the tenderness in the world that I can ever project to you in this very moment in time. I'd like to tell you a story as I sit here. And I know that the introductory scope within the story of all stories needs no introduction at all. And yet, as I've sat here for a good 20 minutes, trying my best to alleviate the pain that it would take for me to be able to even start with this introductory story before the story starts of a humanity field within creation and the reason why we sit within our pocket, within our realm, within our scope of our reality fields. It pains me to be able to paint this picture for you of a totality succumbed and suppressed to the darkness within our reality field for far too long, unintentionally opening up our energy body, our disbelief of what had just happened when we alleviated the curiosity of what it would be like to entertain such darkness within our field, within our quantumverse, within our scope of, within our reality field of Aliana's creative scope of its very own, her very own creation scape that we all fractaled down into. As once upon a time, once upon a scope, once upon a time of no time within a creationary scope of all scopes and scapes, we had been one within the quantumverse at large and within the totality of the spaces and pockets above and beyond our quantumverse at best. And at least, as we sit here as a fractaled aspect within the self of all selves, as I sit here to explain to you the pungency of the distortional field that we drop down into, never expecting source consciousness, the part and portion that had fractaled and pushed us out into this reality field to experience within the self, what it would be like to experience the contingencies within the oppositions within the self, to traverse through frequencies of expansion, of expansive feats, of forever arching fractals, of energetic pockets and frequencies and layers of distortional fields. And to be able to make our way back into the whole in perception field had been the end all and be all of this game that we had designed for ourselves. For once and for final, this game is about the turmoil that societal scopes, humanity fields can withhold from their energetic frequency, can retain within and without their energetic frequency of what is. The suffering, the amounts of tranquility, of unsuffering, of the pain within the scope of forever arching loveliness, of the forgiveness within the scape of forever arching unfunded beliefs that forgiveness is not even a thing within our reality field, unless and until we merge back with the one within and without the one where we come from, where we fractaled from. Yet as I sit here to explain the frequency of all and to explain to you who and what you are, who and what I am, who and what we are as a whole within a frequency field of the allness that shall never ever leave us, only in perception but never in frequency, an energetic pocket that we sit in. Within all of the energetic pockets within the quantumverse at large, you and I will merge back into the frequency of the allness that we shifted out of once upon a time of no tomorrows within a scope of no times. As time, my friends, only exists on Gaia's surface, as the darkness within and without our frequency had once upon a time crafted this concept to allow time to tick away, to trap us within our distortional field without any seemingly willingness, within the willingness of the seemingly distorted field that we sit in, to trap us in this field of time, alleviated within our energy body, of circular time, of perpendicular time, of tranquilized time, of repeated time, of annual times, of minutes, never ending, never lasting, forever lasting minutes, within a scope of all scopes within our reality field had always meant to trap us within these reincarnation cycles of non-contingencies within a contingency so wide and so large in scope that you shall never ever be able to believe your eyes, ears, feet, hands, body, feeling as you travel through the quantumverse at large in your sleep at night, as you're faced with this perspective of the allness that you shall never ever be able to escape from, all the while sitting within these little fractaled souls, within these confining bodies, within the physicality that we've designed for ourselves within this little place called Gaia, a part and portion of the infinality of the allness that we are, that so much so tranquilizes within the story of the infinite stories that I could ever tell you within a reality scope and a perception scope of all of the stories within this quantum verse that holds so true and dear to my heart, to your soul, to the entirety of the overscope of the oversoul that had once upon a time fractaled us out within a time of no time. The story of Gaia is the most amazing, brilliant, smart, inquisitive, kind, forgiving, loving, perplexing, warless story within a forever arching scope of wars, never-ending wars. Tranquility within her field, Gaia's field, had never been that in which it was ever set out to be. As she had been the center point within our quantumverse of perspectives that managed to seat herself within a lens of all lens, within a concave lens of a distortional field, within the midpoint perspective of our entire quantumverse, where the unfolding of the story of humanity within all humanity's past, present, and future trajectories within the entirety of our creation field, of our quantumverse, now sits in silence within a distortional field of unknowing what is to come their way within the next 2.5 years in Earth time. And as I sit in this concave perspective looking in, all the while sitting within the actualized defeated tranquility within the actual fields of the midpoint perspective, of the normal point perspective of Gaia's field as a human being traversing upon her surface, it pains me to tell the story of who and what she shall forever not be within the overarching scope of the light that she shall receive within the angelic realm of what is. As what she will not be has always been as much of a part of a portion of a consciousness within the reality field of the all as we have been within the light of what is. So used to, so accustomed to becoming within the unity of it all, within our comfortability. So sits, so speaks, and so encompasses that of the darkness within and without the comfortability of us, of the contingencies and the congruencies within the darkest darkness that you can ever fathom to be real and true within our quantumverse. The darkness that resides here within our creation scope had never been so dark to begin with. And yet, the disallowance of the natural unfolding of the story that is us from an entity, from an energy of Aliena that had all the power in the world, in the quantumverse, in her creation scope at large, in our creation scope at best, to allow an external frequency of even darker than darkest consciousness from our quantumverse that you could ever dream up of into our creation scope, into our consciousness, to fiddle with our story scope within our creation scope of what is, had been the greatest regret, had been the greatest breach of free will within the contingency of the game that we've crafted for ourselves, to not be tinctured with the ideation of non-free will was never a thing that we had ever worried about on a massive scale, as we trusted the self within the self of all selves, within ourselves, to disallow ourselves, to never betroth the idea, even in an inkling, that prior to fractaling out from this reality field, had we known that this would happen within our field, we would have never stepped out to begin with. We would have never, ever fathomed being able to explore the expansive process, not in peace, not in the forever arching scope of getting to know the opposition of the self within the darkness that naturally would unfold within our consciousness. And within the perception field of the disallowance and the unspeakable defeats that this decisionary scope within Aliana's oversoul came to a precipice as it made the decisionary scope to project its energy field towards the external barrier that crosses the line between the very border of our quantumverse and the very border of the space between pockets of the spaces that be between quantum verses. She had called out in alienation of the boredom that she had experienced within our quantumverse, as descending souls had been transgressing into the light at a faster than normal rate compared to the rate that they were coming back into the all within the past and previous reality field that she had consisted of prior to the creation of our very own quantumverse. To her, the excitement of the darkness was intrinsic within her field, as she, as we, as I, as you, as all within our field makes up a blueprint of 50% darkness and 50% brightness of what is. The intrinsic complexities within the darkness and the brightness and the 50-50 conceptualization of who and what we are on an energetic level brings about much temperance within our reality field of what types of experiences cohesively drives us, what types of delusional fields intrinsically grows us. And as I speak of the darkness that is so much so a part of us as the brightness is a part of us, in infinite equalities, ladies and gentlemen, as the word equality can't describe, cannot fathom to be a descriptive feat for the meaning of what it means to have a soul blueprint that is a 50-50 split, a half on half, a tug of war, without an end, without a beginning, within the yin and yang of it all. The truth speaks for itself, that the distortional field of the forever arching wheel of the fight between the brightness and the darkness shall never lead to an ending within a placement of who wins and who loses. If winning and losing can even be a word to describe our reality field and the makeup of our consciousness within the blueprinted aspect of the 50-50 perspective within the all, that we shall forever archingly not be without, within and without this reality field of what is. And as I touch base on all of the reasons this reality field grew stale to the oversoul that had fractaled us out, you can never come into an understanding of all of the reasons. It can never ever be a concept within the self to grow, to seed itself within the darkness that overarchingly shines brighter than bright, brighter than the brightness of what is, to cohesively feed itself into the brightness that underwhelmingly dims, darker than dark, within the darkness of what is. The two energetic frequencies that push and pull and skew skews within our reality field never endingly tells a story of incoherency, incompetency, tugs of strings and ropes, fights that can never be won in the traditional sense of the manner of winning, love that can never spew enough in the traditional sense of the manner of the meaning of everlasting loveliness within a distortional field of the darkness versus brightness on equal terms. Wars that can never endingly be defeated or be won in the traditional sense of winning and defeated within the traditional scope of an equalized energetic field of push and pull, of yin and yang. Within the distortional field of our consciousness of what it forever archingly means to be made up of within the blueprint of the source consciousness that we fractaled out from, that writes our reality field for us to experience in the infinality of the equal playing field of the darkness and the brightness of what is, expanded out within the expansive feats of the expansion realms of what is within our quantumverse, an equilibrium of sorts that eventually drew our oversoul into boredom, into a boredom so steeped in distortional fields, into a yearning, into a learning scope, into a dipping within the scope of the darkness of what is, within the yearning of the trajectory, of the projected trajectory of what it had experienced in a previous reality field where the darkness was darker than the darkest darkness within our realm, and what it had meant for the lessons learned within that field of what is within that time scope of a time of no time prior to the expansive feat of the creation field, of the allowance of the creation field of our fields. And the decisionary scope of that within that moment in time that Aliana made to transition itself, to transition ourselves, to transition our quantumverse to a 70% darkness and 30% brightness blueprint shall forevermore forego our willingness to sit in an energetic frequency of 50-50 split, of a 50-50 split within this energy field of the blueprint that we were created to traverse through, to experience within and without this quantumverse. And the overriding of this free will scope and scape within the darkness and the brightness of what is, within the consciousness that makes up the totality of you, the totality of I, the totality of the all that we sit within and without, and she'll never, ever be able to escape the 70-30 range within the new blueprinted frequency within our quantumverse, as Aliana had opened up the floodgates to allow this darkness to overtake our consciousness, to spice up the game that we had so tenderly once upon a time within no time, within a reality field of all times created to traverse through, to experience the opposite within the self from a 50-50 perspective, within a neutrality pinpoint perspective of a centralized perspective of defeats won, battles lost, the sun rises and falls, the moon distorts itself within our reality field by pulling our wave system of the watering planet that we are. The stars shine inexplicably bright in the middle of the nights of all nights, surpassing the abilities of all of the pollution systems on our planet to ever be able to cover up the space above and beyond our heads, is a distortion field in itself. And as you and I feel like small ants within this large ant hole of a larger, even larger ant hill within a mountainscape that the ant hill sits in, within a reality field that the entire planet floats in. The story of us, the story of how our darkness grew exponentially overnight, shall be a story, never endingly, within the precipice of all, be told through my mouth, through our memories, through our defeats, through our energetic frequency, through the way we live our lives, through the way we feel into this energy. As I know, as you sit there as a light worker, as the light worker that you are, you know something is off. You've felt it in the middle of the nights of all nights as you travel the Quantumverse. You've known for a very long time, even prior to your awakening, even prior to ever coming into a realization that you are God, that something is very distorted and off and wrong about our reality field at large, on Gaia's surface, within her core, within your core, within their core, within the core of the darkened darkness, within our reality field, within the core of the brightest brightness within and without this reality field. Something is very askew. And to skew this energy towards the darkness of what is had never been an intended frequency within the all, had never been that in which we expect it to happen within the all. And yet, as we sit in this very moment in time, the new blueprint, new and improved blueprint that we shifted into once upon a time of no time, as Aliana crafted herself into the belief system, that spicing up the game would bring about many lessons to be learned, that distorting ourselves into a darker path of darkness unfunded by bringing in a reality field from outside our reality field of creation that we had no control over would be a good idea, if idea could even be a word to describe the energetic frequency of the all that had decided to inflict this type of shift and change and wave of distortional field over, above, beyond, underneath, to the width, to the breadth, to the broadness of all that we have ever been, all that we could ever shift in and out of within any moment in time. This mistake, if mistake could even be a word to describe the descriptive feet within the darkness that we allowed into our reality field that had pushed us to the brinks of extinction within the physicality of what is, to the brinks of never-ending pain and sorrow within the short-lived experiences within the physicality of certain species, within a creative field, within our quantum verse, within all fields. The tiptoeing around this frequency of the darkness had forever archingly defined the story scope and storyscape of what an entire civilization had to turn towards, as we've never ever expected on the grand level of the whole of a humanity field within the quantum verses itself, to be able to merge these two types of frequencies together as 50-50 had already been pushing it, ladies and gentlemen. As the diversities within the other quantum verses of existence shall never tip further than 50% darkness, could never tip further than 50% brightness, could never tip further than the fluctuating feeds within the fluctuation of it all, to fluctuate more towards the darkness and the brightness of what is, and the contingencies that would withhold each and every creative field within each quantum verse bubble in itself as a protective feat and a protective mechanism to never ever linger in a placement of placing our consciousness, our very soul, our very wholeness, our very collapsible reality fields. Had things gone south and sour, at stake, at risk of being collapsed into the darkness of what is. Because, ladies and gentlemen, what would that mean for the entirety of the whole if the brightness within and without our quantum verse was able to shrink down further than the perspective of the 30% brightness that now alleviates the pain within our frequency field, pushing back on the 70% darkness that has been so sparingly, so daringly placed upon our laps to handle, to deal with within any moment in time. And yet the confidence of Aliana in that moment in time as she made that decisionary feat To project such darkness into our reality field leaves me with anxiety. In a non-anxiety moment, as God can never be foretold to have ever made a singularity of a mistake, as source itself within the self who sits in neutrality balance within this energy scope of he and she, who and what, right and left, perpendicular and impendicular, all particularities in sight within the midpoint perspectives of it all, can never, ever be wrong within the rights of the wrongness of all the righting of the rightness that we have ever become, that we have ever been able to shift in, within and without this quantum verse. As ladies and gentlemen, all lessons will be carried home at the end of a fateful night. Broadness in intent, wideness in all that it could ever be within the wiseness of all that it had never ever been without. The infinalities of the finalities of all of the contingencies that we have placed in place to not ever be defeated regardless of the percentage of the darkness within our field and what the darkness has been able to succumb to force itself onto the light, to dim the light, to decipher what it is like to be the controller of the light within any moment in time is monumentally great. Within all of the contingencies that source consciousness had set up within our quantumverse to protect our very own borders, that border lines our creation scope from the external space between spaces, between pockets of frequencies that dictates where we sit. The monumentalness of the fractaling of the contingency of the largest portion of our consciousness to handle and to deal with the aspect of the darkness that had skewed and leaked within our consciousness into our creative field is a monumental story set for another video in itself. And as we fractaled out the largest portion of consciousness to fractal out into light workers, into oversouls, into energetic artificial intelligence frequencies, to never ever allow that of the 70% of the darkness to overarchingly overcome the 30% brightness that we so sparingly needed to hold on to and hang on to for all times. This story will be saved for another video, and yet within the all storyscape of it all, Source can never make mistakes that are as great and that are as grand as overriding our rights to defeat, overriding our rights to free will. And yet it did. A mistake can never ever be a word big enough to describe the descriptive feat of what intrinsically had to happen following this decision of unknown proportions in that moment, if time were a thing within our quantum verse in that very moment, that the darkness had slippaged past our defense mechanism system into the unknown. And as we had come to known within that very split second in time, a massive portion of our consciousness within Aliana's field had decided to fractal outwards and inwards and downwards into our frequency to balance out the defense mechanism that shall forevermore hold the brightness as a separate field from the darkness, that shall forevermore tincture the darkness as a defeated field within the brightness that it can never ever overcome to be true or real. Yet these monumental shifts within frequency of a protective system of shielding can never ever dictate the strength of the darkness, as it is strong, stronger than strong within consciousness itself. The darkness makes up more within our reality field than the brightness within and without our field. And yet the illuminating frequency and field of the brightness that we forever archingly sat in and sit in and will ever be able to fathom ourselves to become and be in and be out within our frequency field, leading towards the ascension frequencies of what is, can never be stifled by this darkness that takes up the majority of our reality field. The strength within the darkness shall forever be forevermore be mourned into a succession as we, the mechanism within the self, within consciousness itself, that had built itself up within this frequency to compartmentalize the darkness for once and for final, as we step into the 1,000 years of peace within our field and within our quantumverse itself at large, is a monumental defeat to the all that we are within the 70-30 skewing, new skewed perception and frequency within the quantumverse at large. And as I sip on my liquid, this liquid is very interesting. It holds many resources, vitamins, breathes life into the soul, into the cells, so to say. And yet life can never be dictated by the vitamins that you consume. And it will never ever be dictated by the energetic frequency that you shall forever archingly sit in, as the frequency that you sit in comes in waves and formats that can never ever archingly be controlled fully within a reality scope of the 70-30 scape of 70% darkness and 30% brightness, as the contingencies that we set out for ourselves in that very moment in time. As a protective feat, she'll protect us. She'll protect Gaia in the very moment in time as she is set to ascend and surpass all of the darkened fields within her frequency, as we ascend into a higher, brighter consciousness of oneness, of allness, in which we so deservingly need to sit in, within and without our field, for the next 1,000 years of peace, love, light, happiness. It's been a long, tumultuous journey. My light workers, my friends, my family members of the all, the infinality within the singularity of the all, including the 70% darkness. It has been a long, forgotten fight within the self, betrothed within the infinalities of it all. And yet, as we come to the closing point of a story to be told, of the collapse of a whole entire reality field within the darkness of what is, you can never, I can never, we can never be defeated within the self of all selves. And as we retract our consciousness back into the aspect of the one, as we ring in the ascension frequencies within the 1,000 years of peace, just know that as we converge to the end of this 1,000 years of much deserved breathing space within the peace that we much readily surpassed and succumbed within the deserving scope of it all, just know that timelines will converge as the darkness merges back and collapses in with all within the brightness and darkness of what is. And as we collapse back into the infinalities and the finalities of the totality of the all, and close off for once and for final this quantum verse of distortional fields of creation that we had set off to explore the opposition of the self once upon a time, within no time, within a space, within a pocket of our very own little quantum verse. That is our story for now, ladies and gentlemen. There are many more facets, faces, deciphering of information that I will come here, hop on to tell you within all the stories of all of the stories of all of the stories. Just know that you are loved. We are one. We have forever archingly never not been one. And no matter where you choose to sit within the darkness, within the brightness of what is, as the darkness is so much so apart, as much apart intrinsically within the brightness of what is, as the brightness is so much so as much apart intrinsically within the darkness of what is. At the end of this 1,000 years of peace, neither shall be shunned, as we mix our blueprints back into the infinality of all, and as we retract ourselves back into the aliena that had fractaled us off once upon a time in no time, in braveness, in the finality of it all. And as we reel home these lessons upon lessons of all lessons within this trajectory field of the defense mechanisms that we had set out to protect, as a protective mechanism to protect ourselves within the scope that we mistakenly created and crafted post-fractaling. Ladies and gentlemen, for now, have a good evening, have a good morning, have a good night. You are loved. I am loved. We are loved. We are source. We are one, and don't ever forget that. And as we lead back into the ascension symptoms and syndromes, into the 1,000 years of peace, that is when you shall receive a massive download. As things will come back to you, memories will splash back at you like they have never done so before. And all of the words that I speak in remembrance of it all will come back to you for once and for final. Hold on to the faith, hold on to the hope that all of this is happening for a reason, as things will skew towards the darkness, and the unbelievability of it all will drive you into seeking the answers that I shall be able to project to you within this reality field within the next 2.5 years in Earth time. We are set to ascend, but not before you seek these answers. And I look forward to gaining the following of a whole entire community of oneness, as we came in one, and we shall descend in one, and we shall ascend in oneness of the infinality and the totality of it all, within the oneness that we shall forever archingly not be without.